Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. The title for today's episode is Does It Matter? And so, intentionally, I felt the sentence is standing in two worlds. That, as a general question, does it matter? Whatever that it is. And then the other view, does it matter? Does it matter the objective acknowledgement that something is an it, something is a thing? You know? I find that human existence is being navigated and piloted by human experience. When the human being goes to look at what is the experiential component to the moment and what is the existential component to the moment, they will notice that existentially it's everything that is visible in front of your eyes. If you were to close your eyes, you would still see the experiencer is active. It's just that the curtains are pulled. The visual senses are not there. That means, I don't know how many people have tried this, but if you walk and suddenly close your eyes and keep walking, you lose your orientation as a suggestion of how much constant checking with reality we need to do. That means we're creatures that are based on feedback if we want to relate to reality. The experiential content of the moment is the subjectivity, is any object you look at and it has more than just what that object is being, it has more meaning than just what it's being. For example, I'm looking at a cup in front of me, this coffee cup, this blue mug. Now, the fact that it's a blue mug, the fact that it's my blue mug, the fact that it's in my hand, it's all this. These are all the subjective component to the moment. And when we can discriminate between what is objective and what is subjective, then we have an ability not to suffer from what doesn't exist. Because the density for existence is different. Right now, I am touching this table in front of me, but I cannot touch the table behind my eyes with these hands. That means if I was to envision a table, literally any kind of table, let's say Victorian table, and suddenly I can visualize myself slamming on it, but I won't hear that slam in the external realm. So behind our eyes, there is also the processing of a world going on. But when we close our eyes, experience is moving existence. When we open our eyes, we have access to visual existence, and so we go based on that. I think it is very obvious that the evolutionary path of the human being is based on its environment. And we have just gone thinking about the outer environment. The person thinks about where they're living, what neighborhood they're living, you know, if they can even manage that lifestyle, you know. And it's all from the influence of what happens in external reality. That means either the world in front of your eyes is moving first or you're moving before the world moves. If you move first, you experientially have free will. If the world moves, you existentially, you are being the will of nature. So that means, like, I remember when I was like 10 years old, I was my family visited Iran one summer, and I remember when I was in Iran, coincidentally that summer that my family was in Iran, we were visiting. My grandfather passed away, and on the father's side, and it was a very strange moment. I remember we went to the funeral, and the funerals in Iran are not as quiet as you see the funerals in, for example, certain Western cultures. In Western cultures, everybody wears black and they go there, and it's like this quiet kind of grieving. But in Iran, it's way more dramatic. That means if you were going to give an Oscar performance, to the behavior of people during funerals, it would definitely go to Eastern cultures, because the reaction of it is extreme, and then the people are in such a strict mindset that when they have a chance to cry, they break down. That means imagine if it was illegal to cry, okay? And because it was illegal to cry, you couldn't cry for years and years and years, and suddenly when you got one chance, you exploded, imagine, out of tears. You broke down, you collapsed. You know, a lot of men who feel they have to just be shiny armor this whole life, you kind of miss out on your emotional intelligence. You know. Anyways, I was there at the funeral, and I remember everybody was crying, and there were, my aunts were kind of screaming, shouting, kind of. It was an intense. My grandfather was a huge figure. He was like the center of 50 people's lives. It was a big family, and I remember that I hadn't, me and my twin brother, because we had lived in Canada, I hadn't seen my grandfather. I didn't have that many memories, maybe a few memories of him. And I remember I start crying. I remember everybody was crying, and I feel sad too. I start crying, and I cry for 20 minutes. Then after that, my tears stop. I have no more memories of my grandfather, but I was still sad. Sometimes when you don't know someone, but when you see others who knew someone and that person isn't around, just from how their eyes, their voice, how they break, trust me, it's like when a comrade in a battlefield gets shot, you feel that thing. And anyways, just to finish the story, when I was there at my grandfather's funeral, it's very different. I mean, again, I'm going to say this because I think it's an important difference to mention. In Western culture, it's like a very discreet and quiet and organized sort of funeral. But in Iran, the funerals are more intimate. It's as if uh, um, the sons of the father, they take their hand, they literally with their own hands put their father in the grave. So I saw my father and uncles, all of them, hold my grandfather's body and kind of put it into the grave. It's a bit more, you can say, street, the funerals, and as this was happening, I remember my tears finish, and I see others, and I just go for a walk, and that was the first time, guys. I'm not joking. That's the earliest moment in my life where I remember I walked and I had a thought stream. Before these talks, way before 2014, that was the earliest moment in my life where I went for a walk and there was something happening, an inner processing. And in Iran, the funerals, in Tehran, the place, I forget the name of the place, but the funerals are not, the gravestones are not vertical. The gravestones are not vertical. The gravestones are flat on the ground. If I don't know how to say this, just rectangles on the ground. There is no vertical gravestone. I'll never forget it. I was walking and I saw a leaf on the ground. I can even see the picture in my head right now. I saw a leaf on the ground slowly moving. And that was when I realized everything in this world moves beyond it. I noticed that I was crying for my grandfather, but I was not crying for the leaves of the tree. I did not cry for the goldfish in Persian New Year that died after the New Year and it wasn't fed properly. I didn't cry for many things that had emerged in life as intelligent phenomena and had left, you know? And that's when I realized it's as if just because we are creatures that feel we are born and feel we exist and we are in some sense in some sort of creative motion, the same time, little did I know that the moment I was born was the moment that many were also dying on this planet. And so life and death, rather than them being phases, rather than the person thinking I was born and then I'm going to go, I'm maintaining this and then I'm going to die, rather than that, it was as if like those three ideas of things beginning, things being maintained to some level, and things suddenly breaking down. Imagine you were neither. Imagine you were not a creature that was born, but you entered the room of birth. Imagine you were not a creature that could be changed, but you entered the room of change. Imagine you're a creature that could not die, but you entered the room of death. You passed through many doorways of conception as attention in this realm. And when we can stabilize, in the chat section, Martin says, Mr. Within, as a male, we are impressed. Crying is a weakness. Let me tell you, crying is not a thing on itself. Crying is never just crying. Crying is when the inner realms shift too intensely, or they shifted before you could consciously let them go. That's when tears find you. Tears find you when you need a time machine. Tears find you when you wish you could have seen more that was in the moment. And tears find you when you had an opportunity to build an advanced civilization and you didn't. The weakest people on the battlefield are those who don't see their weakness. And the strong always see something more. I noticed this as a kid. Every person I would see in my life that I felt they had a strong character, it was as if they were grounded in a certainty and in a trust in the world that had nothing to do with the visible condition they were in. As if like the person had gone through like 10 battlefields, so when he was on the 11th battlefield and the 11th battlefield was someone else's first battlefield, that person with the who's it's their first time on the battlefield, they look at the person that's been on the battlefield for their 11th time, and they're like, how is this person so calm? And it's because it's exposure and it's familiarity. And it's the recognition that the human being can move in so many ways that to define ourselves is a game of our choice. Does the it matter? Do objects matter? Objects are made of matter, but it's like objects matter because objects are matter. Really, it's not that it's like a breeze hits the leaves and none of them know which way they will move. There was a character in this Japanese comic series named Shingeki no Kyojin, and in this series, um, there was this kind of like badass commander named Levi, and then there was this kid who doubted himself but had great power. And they were in the battlefield, and the kid who had the power had to kind of step up when he doubted himself. And then the commander looks at him and he says, he says something, I don't remember the exact wording, but it was in the sense where he said, you can trust in your battle plans. You can trust in your comrades. You can trust in whatever kind of great strategy you have. But nobody ever knows what happens on the battlefield. And that's the nature of reality. And if you try to know it too much by shaping it all the time, you miss out on the natural ways it moves. Like a lot of people, they don't sit down with a notebook and they're like, let me plan how I'm going to breathe for the next 100 years. It's like every breath consciously, let me plan for it. It's like, no, it just happens. And that's the thing about living. A lot of things are naturally happening. Your body heals itself on its own. Many people don't realize that a sort of healthy approach is just stopping the unhealthiness. Ever since I stopped, taking sugar, literally, I was like, I felt sugar had betrayed me. The sweet food of the world had deceived me. I had ran after it only to realize sugar stops the organs from working. The kind of sugar you find in like, artificial kind of tasting food. Regardless of, excuse me, regardless of um, the the pathway we see our evolution is on, we have to be responsible of our inner life as well. We have to pay attention to inner events. Inner events occur. It's not that you're just experiencing location and reacting to it or responding to it in a subtle way in your subconscious, you know? When reality is not an object, you become a student of your subjective realms. When reality is no longer a subject, you become an experiential rhythm, which at most the communication is just trust of effort or trust before or no trust of effort. Really. That means it's like, what could man do when he saw infinity? He could trust it or distrust it, and that has been what has been happening. This experiential rhythm, it means that we graduated over objective existence and we graduated from subjective experience, and now the only thing left is existence conscious living as the world. You're right now living consciously as a person, and then you lived as a world. Now check this out. How do we know that before we were individuals we were not a collective being? How can we know that? Maybe before a child has individuality, it is the whole world moving. So I feel that we were an unconscious movement of a world. We became an unconscious self. There came the emergence of the objective evolution, the design of limbs. I mean, that's the unique thing. When I look at nature, animals, creatures, insects, this is as if like nature, it was built into it to kind of have limbs, you know? So I feel that it's like the branches of the tree are the limbs of the tree. It's natural for limbs to emerge, but it's also a mystery. So the objective evolution, the fact that we are creatures that could walk on the earth, and so we were no longer just an unconscious movement of atoms in space. You know, I mean, we were an unconscious movement of atoms, but we became an unconscious movement of atoms with a unique form. So imagine a creature that has legs and has limbs, but has no mind. It's just movement, just pure movement and effort. So I feel for eons, we evolutionary wise, we're just effort. Whether we think about it or not, it's built into us. You know, especially if your DNA holds its glow from antiquity. After the unconscious self, there emerged the conscious self. The conscious self was the, as you know, kind of like similar to Jacques Lacan. He says the mirror effect in children. The child notices itself in the mirror. That's what happened. This creature noticed its shadow. This creature noticed its reflection in the pond. It noticed somehow it became aware that it is an individual, and that was the emergence of the subjective evolution. Kind of like how a caterpillar goes into a cocoon and goes into a metamorphosis. And during metamorphosis, the caterpillar cells all die, they die, and the last cell of the caterpillar dies, the cell of the butterfly emerges. So, Martin, I see your comment. It's an interesting comment. I'm going to give an answer to it, but let me just finish this evolution thing I'm saying. And okay. So that's the thing. The subjective evolution, we metamorphosized into the subjective evolution. Literally, I'm saying we became a subject, like how a caterpillar became a butterfly, an object evolved into a subject. Wondrous world we live in, folks. So now that's where we are. We are the third phase of evolution on this plane, and these are like seasons; they keep repeating. So right now we are the conscious self, and we are going through a metamorphosis through a cocoon, and that cocoon is language, and through the cocoon of language we are awakening, just like going through another metamorphosis. The conscious subjective self is becoming equivalent to the conscious world. That means right now we're conscious as a character in an unknown world. We're gonna be the whole world's consciousness. I'm not joking, we're evolving that way. And it's unfathomable because after some point, you're not an individual to have a story of journeying. So that internal evolutionary pathway is leading us to become a conscious world. Right now, we're conscious. Let's say your body is a part of the earth, but it's a small part of the earth. You're now conscious as this small part. The way that nature seems to be going is towards that. I feel it's like our past was a drop. Right now, it's a river. The future is an ocean. So Martin in the chat section says, Martin Shadow Moon. When I was around 3 or 4, I could close my eyes and see infinity. I recall it scared me to almost horror. I felt lost and alone. So, I mean, of course, when you were 3 or 4, that's a unique experience. That's definitely something to cherish and study that memory. But I'll tell you this, that you gotta pilot properly towards infinity. You have to be comfortable with space, with the singular, and with the dualistic before you can properly pilot towards infinity. I consider there to be 4 dimensions, guys, to this whole plane of existence. I kind of looked at it and then I made a decision. Made a decision that this is how far it's kind of that this is the, I feel that these 4 dimensions means that you as a creature, as phenomenology, aware of phenomenology, which is consciousness. It's like consciousness is the spotlight, and that thought or image or inner image or subject is the actor. And so, if we consider the content of consciousness to be objects and subjects, then consciousness cannot be an object or a subject. That means the consciousness to itself is not an object or a subject. When it looks, when it, like for example, when somebody looks at you, you're an object. You know, when you look at yourself, you're a subject. But there are ways where that self can look at itself, and it can't be a concept anymore. So, if you are, let's say, someone interested with the idea of infinity, okay, I kind of got introduced to that idea when I was young, and my closet door had mirrors instead of the doors, and the mirrors would open from the inside. So I would go and stand between the two mirrors and experience a sort of hollow, infinite reflection, optical illusion. But that was very extreme because the optical illusion went to some meaningless edge. For example, in art, there's something called, in regards to the spacing, called vanishing point. And I could notice the vanishing point of the optical illusion of my infinite reflection in the mirror when I saw it. You know, it's like everything is like a technology. I'm not joking. And we are the user of the technology. It's like attention is using conscious life. You know, this might be kind of strange thing to say, but because the species is obsessed with resource allocation, it's missing out on its efficiency. Because there isn't patience, decisions are being made with not enough variables of consideration. Because any decision, right now, me holding a cup in my hand, you know, that cup is a decision in my hand. The strength of my hand being there is a decision, right? And what are the unknown variables? The hand could suddenly let go. What is another unknown variable? The cup could fall down and not break. What is another unknown variable? You know, the cup and my hand are not even here. It's all a simulation. You see, these are all the unknown variables that surround and are like the degrees of the known center of the circle of whatever you're looking at. So when I, for example, look at something, I notice how I know it, but I also notice, and it has design, how I don't know it. That means, what if someone told you every time you realize you don't know something, you actually know that you don't know. So you know something. Do you know what I mean? That means, imagine you are someone right now super happy, or imagine you're someone super sad, you know? You're gonna see, how do you know you're super sad? How do you know you're happy? How can you, in a system where equilibrium is necessary for us to define happiness based on the object or the subject? That means it's like someone walking to their backyard and seeing it's a sunny day and thinking everywhere in the world is a sunny day right now. You see? That's the fascinating thing about life. On one part of the planet it's raining, on another part it's incredibly sunny. It's a multi-dimensional system. It has it seems like it has one energetic core, and then this energy has nothing else to do other than move. So I was like, oh man, what's energy's job? And it's just movement. Because we don't consider there to be energy if there's no movement there. I mean, we do consider everything to have energy and be energy, but I'm saying, like, for example, when I look at that bird kind of digging through the dirt right now in front of me, that bird, it's as if it moves, it has the energy. If that bird couldn't move, then we'd be like, it's missing something, right? And in your life, you gotta kind of have an ability to, like with an ego vision of being able to be on some branch of whatever local reality you're in, and also to be able to fly like an eagle into the sky and look at the whole forest, right? So if you have this ability in your life, in any situation, you get to see your own blind spots. Because the issue is not trying to, like, the person who tries not to make a mistake hasn't understood, has never made a mistake. Because there is no such thing as a mistake, or let me say it like this, there are mistakes, of course, but what I'm saying, as long as there is continuity, fear doesn't have a face. As long as there is this fearless endurance, there is no face to fear. It changes, you know. People would go out and confront their realm. Do you know there were knights back in the day? I mean, think about it. The knight was like an alien to the peasant. You know, the peasant would look at the knight and see this kind of like person in this intense armor with this giant sword, and the knight is walking, and the knight is like, "I'll defend the realm," or whatever, you know. If you're an object, you will run after objects. You even need to for your survival. If you're a subject, you will run after subjects. You will need it for your survival. But if you are an awareness before you're a self, then, dear listener, your presence is the only teaching. Do you know there's a point where there's no longer a need for meditation? There's no longer a sort of student-teacher, inner teacher's outer-student relationship. That relationship is there until you discover the inseparability of phenomenology, which is what all those people in the New Age community who see synchronicities, who look at the clock and it's a unique time, that's what their intuition is doing. The intuition, the Jungian synchronicity is a coincidence, but in the inner realms, it's not. You know what that means? That means it's like getting a thought of someone and then suddenly picking up your phone and see your phone was on silent, but that person was calling you. Like getting that kind of strange thing, you know? Which makes me feel that when people throughout history have prayed, because there is, like, ultimately, if you stripped away all the language and terminology, you would just see human behavior on this planet. And because every person has a unique DNA, even though people may do the same act, but everyone is behaving differently than everyone else. You know, even if it could be the same behavior, like a bunch of Zen masters could be drinking tea, you know, in a Zen tea ceremony, but it's like it's not, they're not the same person. So that's the thing, you know. One thing in life that's crucial, I feel, is that you have to realize your own value, because you won't invest in yourself. And if you're not going to invest in yourself, why should others? If you don't care for yourself, why should others? If you can't forgive yourself, why should others? If you can't be free, why do you know how can others help make you free? Why should others make you free? That's the thing. We have to engage. That is the most important thing. Your world doesn't have to make sense. Your conscious day doesn't have to per se have this ultimate kind of tactical strategy, as if like the child at the age of 12, they ask them, what do you want to be? And the child decides at that moment, I want to be this. You know, do you know how many times the eyes of that kid's going to change? Do you know how many times your eyes have changed throughout this life after you go through any experience? And so, do you notice the transience of how I am not who I was yesterday, and you're not the same person who you were yesterday? Even though we are physically, but the internal constitution is new. because there is a gap. Because when we sleep, our world blinks. So, Martin, I would say that experience of infinity you had is very crucial. But anyone who wants to wonder about it, you got to get comfortable with emptiness, with space, with absence. After you're content with the zero dimension, you got to be comfortable with any sort of singular phenomena. That means you got to look at people and first of all, be comfortable with space. How everyone has space, everybody needs space. Space is very crucial to the function of the human psychology. You know, if just you can just see it in animal psychology, when the animal gets cornered, it becomes wild. I don't know how many people have seen a cornered animal, but in my childhood, I saw this dog where it was kind of messed up. I was a kid. I went to this cottage and they had cut the ear of the dog. Why? To make the dog a savage, violent dog. Okay, the dog wasn't violent, and they cut the ear of the dog to make the dog violent, savage, and then they tried to grab the dog, not to hurt it, but just to like put the dog somewhere. And even that scene, that part where they were cutting the ear of the dog, right? I didn't see that the dog's ear was cut, but it was like, I'm telling you, third world countries, it's a totally different scene. That means it's like we're still animals, but we are animals who see in a way that's not animal-like, you know. So this dog was being cornered, and I could see its viciousness. I could see how that dog was like, "What the fuck are these people doing?" Like, you know, I could totally see there was this sort of being cornered and having no choice other than your animal instincts to come, and you become wild. I'm telling you, I've in certain moments in my youth, I kind of tapped into that instinct. I mean, I've been pretty much a passive person many moments of my life, but at moments that I would get confronted, because I was bored in that passivity, I had this kind of like fighting nature to some degree, but not always, but sometimes it would emerge. And in those moments, it was this rush. I mean, of course, there's biochemistry, a biochemical explanation of the state of mind, but it was just a moment where I felt I was a creature that didn't need to depend on just the linear faculties, that deep down there is a savageness that endures. So, what does that mean? That means if there was a post apocalyptic event like we see in movies and kind of like we were back into like caveman times, we, even though we were human beings who had such an advanced mind, we would have access to our savageness. It's like a dormant wilderness in every human being, you know? That means, believe it or not, when technically speaking, you're an animal right now, you know? So, I mean, anybody who denies that there's some sort of that we are like a based on animal, just put your palms on the ground and look at the positioning of your organs and tell me if you still think you're not an animal. But we're not just an animal. I feel that the animal is the brush. The paint is from perhaps potentially beyond the stars or beyond the dimension. Beyond the outer sky or the inner sky, I don't know. So we have access to this savageness. Um, and when I would get in fights, that savageness would just come. If that savageness was like, let me tell you what it is. It's a rage. It's an anger upon your own inner realms. That means usually when people get angry, they never get angry when another person gets angry. They get angry when their value has changed in their eyes. Do you know? That means only the wise ones dodge the bullets of language. The fools fight the bullets. And, you know, here and there, there's some people who are like Neo. They just look at the bullets and they're like, You know, it's like you like Gandalf, you shall not pass. You know, imagine Neo said this to the bullets. You know, maybe in the future there's going to be some people who are like, we need to mix the Matrix 2 with Lord of the Rings 2. Somehow infuse those two worlds, you know. It will call it Lord of the Rings Reloaded. You know, we have suddenly Neo, Morpheus, and Trinity, like Morpheus instead of Gandalf telling Frodo. It's like, Frodo, choose the Shire or Mount Doom. Anyways, there is instinct, and sometimes I feel, could that instinct pilot the inner realms? Because an animal doesn't think. An animal goes on a reaction based. I mean, technically, a creature is observant. You can't. It's not like our ancestors weren't aware of stuff. They were aware of stuff. They could touch something. Even the caveman is depicted in media holding a club. You know. After you've confronted singular phenomena, then you enter duality. And duality is where how you're understanding me right now, and where you're hearing this, and anytime you speak and move, you project as an individual in a story. That's your individual consciousness. And when you even look at the word individual, it kind of, I don't know, for me, it poetically sounded like in the dual, even though it's individual, you know. You know, it's like the result of a division. That means, honestly, there was nothing to talk about. We had to make ourselves into something that was different than everything to then become an abstract something that could endlessly relate to the world. So that's where we are. We have actually evolved incredibly well as a species, like ridiculously well. And now it's like, rather than us thinking we're this weak, feeble, selfish, gened creature, you know, like literally have genes from a company called Selfish. That's another way you have selfish genes. I think that tops one of the silliest things I've ever said. You know, there's two ways to have, a selfish gene, Oh, man. Anyways. After we wash our selfish genes. Oh, man. Okay. Sorry, guys, I gotta breathe. I'm just imagining if I told this joke to Richard Dawkins, he'd have the most kind of like soulless stare. You know what? I'm gonna dedicate an episode to this. This concept is to selfish genes and selfish genes. Anyways, I feel like there's 8 billion candles lit in the darkness of this cosmos, and these candles aren't doing anything. I mean, they are doing something, but they're not doing. They're doing maybe 30, let's say 23%, 24% of their ability. Right now, I don't feel we are living as an advanced species because you can see in how many ways it can be advanced and it's not. You know, we can consider ourselves an advanced civilization. That civilization, literally everything is updating so fast that the image of what we want to be in the future is never. It's never an image. It's this endless, efficient stream of humanity. Inevitably being led to a choice of going beyond the language threshold, or in some sense overpopulating the whole cosmos. I mean, I think this is the only strategy that really human beings have. We are on a rock in the middle of nowhere. After we've attained mastery of our planet, we're going to attain mastery over other planets. After we've attained mastery over galaxies, we're going to endlessly, let us say, go as far as we can. And at some point, we will be acquainted to some sort of weird life form. So what does that mean? That means if there's endless human beings endlessly exploring the cosmos, there is an endless game. So I have no fear that it's like if it's even even though they say 99.9% of species go extinct. You know why they say 99.9%? You know, because we're still here. Because we're still standing. And that 1% is us having an ability and an intelligence to bypass extinction. I've proposed a strategy. I feel every human being should propose a strategy. I feel right now we are in an information ownership phase. Right now, language, words, concepts, ideas, they are slaves. They are slaves to the one wielding them. You know? They're like language, like sometimes when I give these talks, they feel like horses, and I feel like the chariot driver, you know, of all these talks. And um, the navigation of attention through form and even a mysterious either return, remembrance, or realization of the unknown. That means for me, when I realized, I have considered, I have sat down, looked at this world endless times, and I was like, what's the answer? What's the answer? From the beginning of my life, it's felt like that. What's the answer? What's the truth? What's the solution? What's the way? You know? Only for me to realize the unknown is right here. That means I can give 100,000 talks. The unknown will remain the unknown. And that's the beauty of it. And I notice in my whole life, I'm missing out on how there is an unknown way of handling life where you don't get bored because your inner realms don't move faster than your outer realms. Not faster, but the thing is, like, desire happens because in your mind's eye, you're actually experiencing the desire in a subtle way. If you didn't create the future for yourself, if you just stared at a thought when you had it and noticed that thought comes and goes, like everything, every phenomenology, then you find an ultimate contentment. Then no longer spirituality becomes costume games, ideological costume games. It becomes an experience as it's meant to be, as it always was, as if from the beginning of your life till now, there's been someone experiencing, you know, this idea you call you. And so shall we wonder about this. There's this, I don't know which culture it is, but I think it's from the East. The quote says, when the child is born, the world laughs. Imagine all the parents, all the family members, a newborn child entering the world, them being happy, laughing, smiling, you know. You know, before I finish that quote, guys, just a second. Okay, guys, sorry about that. When the child is born, The world laughs, the child cries. Imagine, again, newborn child being born, parents, world celebrating that its new intelligence has emerged. When the child dies, when the man dies, at the end of his life, imagine, the person's gotten old and is leaving with the wind. When the child dies, the world cries, but the child laughs. That means when the being enters, the newborn child cries, the whole world is like, yay, a new human being, you know, has emerged. When that human being gets old and dies, it's as if, check this part out, this is the point I want to say. It's the person has died, the person is leaving, and the world cries for its loss. The world cries for its loss. Yet, the being laughs because the being is moving beyond. You graduate from this classroom of manifestation. You know, there's something Stoic, the Stoics pointed out that's very necessary. Um, his name was Epictetus. Epictetus says, we suffer not from the events in our lives. We suffer not from the events in our lives, but from the judgments we have about them. Like how next level is that quote? And we have, for example, Marcus Aurelius saying the soul is dyed with the colors of its thoughts. That means in any moment you go, the thought you have, it kind of, you know, gives a color, gives a sort of, the environment is a voice in the mind. Like I'm telling you, when I'm in nature and I give a talk, like when I see natural phenomena, my metaphors just become way more natural. You know? Like if I was speaking by a construction site, which I have, I don't know how many. There was a point where I would literally speak downtown. You know? Anyways, ask yourself what is moving in the moment. And whatever your conclusion is, trust it and keep going. And eventually, as you trust the moment of life, you allow it to progress. Imagine somebody was like, universe, give me everything I want. And, or the person shouted at the sky, universe, why aren't you giving me everything I want? And the universe was like, buddy, I'm giving it to you. You're not opening your hands. It's like, how can I give it to you if you don't have your hands open? You know, and that's what I mean by trusting life and living it, and its dimensions open up. Some things you'll never, it's like you'll never know what's underneath a rock unless you move the rock and see what's underneath. You know? That's the nature of reality. And sometimes you'll never know beyond a way of looking at something unless you literally lift that thing and see what's behind it. Like, you know, you can study subjects, you know? not only subjects that relate to objects. So interesting question, guys. I'm going to share this with the audience. Martin in the chat section, and by the way, the talk I was, you know, I'm going to say this like, okay, here I'll answer the question. Martin says, Mr. Within, have you ever felt that you are in a simulation VR game, and your real self is playing you? First, I'm going to share that you're pointing towards the simulation theory, and one thing noteworthy to mention is that when Elon Musk was asked about it, he said there's a 1 billionth chance that imagine in the past civilizations managed to make a video game indistinguishable from reality, and we're in that video game right now, right? So the idea, because our past is unknown and our future is unknown, the simulation can be attributed to both angles. You know, we can feel we're being simulated from the future, we can feel we're being simulated from the past. You know, or we can even feel we're a simulation beyond the laws of nature. You know, um, and really, when clones, like I kind of read this article that in China and Japan, they're cloning kittens and dogs. Like, I was like, okay, that's literally simulation. That is simulation of creaturehood. Now, if the simulation of creaturehood creates a good enough antenna, and consciousness is actually a wave, then even clones can have poetically souls, you know. But I'll tell you this: in modern times, we call it a simulation. Back in the day, the yogis and the mystics call it a dream. They called it a dream. They thought life was a dream. Whether you see it as a dream, and whether you see that as a dream of just the unknown, or dream of a known God in your mind, or whatever, as if like life is God dreaming, you know. You can ascribe the simulation, you can animate it in many ways. But in my personal experience, Martin, there was a week of my life where, just for 1 week, for 1 week, I felt that there were I felt like, just when you, okay, imagine you look at your hand, just look at your hand right now. Whoever's listening to this, look at your hand, look at your right hand, okay? And look at your hand and look at your fingers. And do you see how your fingers each can individually move, but they are connected to the palm? So when you move your wrist, all your fingers move. But when you move each individual finger, the other fingers can be stationary. So I had this feeling that simultaneously, it happened for a week, I felt I was in some sort of uh, imprisonment in another dimension, and this whole realm was a simulation. I had that kind of feeling for 2 weeks, but it wasn't in that kind of story. It was more like, you know how, like, you're, let's say you have roommates, and your roommates are, what do you call it? They're in the house, but you don't know where. But you know that there's others in the house. So it was as if I felt a moment that I knew I was in this world, but I felt there were other. My awareness was also existing through other versions of me that I couldn't see. So that was a moment where I felt my behavior is potentially influencing the life of my life force, and other, uh, poetically, other dimensions of this realm. But of course, the mind, you got to understand, the mind generates. The mind is like, if somebody said, what's the mind's job? It's like to endlessly generate worlds for you to dwell through. So for me, attributelessness, the mysticism that goes towards the enlightenment, that there's two ways, let's say. There's an enlightenment through the veil of silence, and then there's an enlightenment through the veil of advanced communication. Those who become aware of the nature of reality through silence, um, you move as the observer first. Or you are space before you move in the space, another way of saying it. But those who, through advanced communication, through moments of intensity in life, and you can say any experience in life is a communication between the person and the world. That means it's like sometimes you want to know how if nature, if the Native Americans were just hallucinating a spirit in nature, I'll tell you this. It's like, just look at your attitude and look at how animals behave based on your attitude. And I think this is why Stoicism was very powerful, because the Stoic would come in society and be be equipped with various structures and modes of thought and intellect, only to realize that when the person went to nature and they saw animals, it's like the animal didn't respond to a deviation from one's natural resonance. So I would say, are you a simulation of your past? You know, or something even more mysterious. That moment when a person sleeps, how do they know they woke up? How do they know they're still not dreaming after the first time they slept? That means thinking as if right now you're like, I don't know, let's think of a random age. Let's say you suddenly remember right now, okay, it would be as intense as me suddenly feeling as if who I am right now is a simulation of the 7-year-old me dreaming about the future. Imagine, like, how intense would that be? Exactly, yeah. So at nature is, I mean, just the fact that consciousness is not an object makes us feel that it's like free will is a simulation. I mean, that's modern neurology and in a secular context is stating that it's like free will is an illusion. And a way that we can verify that, not just even neurologically, is simply this, that if there was no human being, there would be no concept of a free will. So you first need something to have free will, but when that something considered itself as just atoms, it couldn't see anything else. So believe it or not, it's kind of hilarious. It's like the scientific scope is, on some sense, rejecting abstraction that is not attained through scientific means, and at the same time realizing abstraction is the only place left, because we all see reality. We are all getting access to reality. That means when you wonder about something, that's because you want to see more out of it. And you know, I have this vision. Sometimes I've thought about, like, what would my last words be poetically, on paper, or just in like, what would my last words be on this planet? And I thought, it's like, what if it's like just this emotion came to me that I just put into words, and it was like march towards the unknown. Or rise, mankind, rise. Probably. But that's the thing. The unknown is the update. So if you can be comfortable with the unknown and you can be comfortable with the known, you will strangely realize you're comfortable with everything that happens. And even if nothing happens, you're comfortable with that too, because you're witnessing life. It's not an ideological suffering. You're like, if I'm a thought, how can a thought suffer? Can a thought get hurt? This is a good question. Can thoughts get hurt? Like if I think I'm a thought right now, and even though somebody hits me, let's say, imagine, or I go into a fight or something, and I get hit, or I hit, or whatever, the situation becomes, it's like, did the thought of me get hit? The idea is that the thought was never at war. The thought of war is not war, it's a decision. It's always, as if you're conscious, it's a decision. If you're unconscious, then in some sense there's no conscious decision making. So when I realize my suffering is in the conscious waking state, because you don't suffer in your dreams. You may have a nightmare or something, but then you wake up from it, so the suffering ends. So it's as if like the suffering was never there when you wake up from the dream. The world is absolute. For the attention that is simultaneously being nowhere and now here. I feel that human experience is another way of saying how Purusha and Prakriti dance with one another. How space interacts with matter and matter interacts with space. Anyways, guys, I'm going to open it up to Q&A. And let me see if I can set up Discord. Out of curiosity, would people in the chat section be interested if I, post a Discord link or not? And by the way, the talk's ended at this point. Thanks for listening. If you've listened this far, it's going to just be Q&A after. Yeah. Okay. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope this episode was helpful. I encourage everyone to go buy a stack of paper and a pen. Just choose a pen, you know, like Morpheus from the Matrix. Choose a pen, a chosen pen, you know. The, you know, and I keep wanting to say like choose one pen, but I want to kind of connect it to the chosen one pen. But anyways, yeah, get a pen, put it on a stack of paper, put that paper around you wherever you are, on a table that like a relic. Put that piece of paper on the table like a relic, and in some sense, don't touch that paper casually. Only pick up the pen when you get an idea throughout the day that is, it's like this inner realm vision you get that is so unique that you have to write it down because you don't want to forget it. Only write it then when it's too. It's like so. This way, you're going to put yourself in a habit of noticing the new when it arrives, and when you write something down, it becomes you become more conscious of it. Believe it or not. So, anyways, guys, keep writing. Much blessings and namaste.